All right, we're going to get started. And good evening. Welcome to the RSU number 5 Board of Directors meeting. And it's Wednesday, December 13th, 2023, and we are in the Freeport High School Library. And we have most in attendance tonight, except for our illustrious chair is not here, Michelle, and Mara is running a little bit late, so she will be along. So we'll get things started with the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay. Could I have a motion for consideration and approval of the minutes of November 29th, 2023 as presented, barring any errors or omissions? Kara and Malik, all in favor? Great, thank you. Have any adjustments to the agenda?
We do have a few this evening. Item 8, Superintendent's Report. Under letter C, I have an additional resignation to announce. I'd like to add a letter D, substitute wages under the Superintendent's Report. And under item 14, Personnel, letter A, consideration and approval to employ a second grade teacher at Moore Street School for the remainder of the school year. And those are the adjustments.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so we will move over to our good news and recognition with the report from our student representative, Phoebe.
Alrighty, so we're very busy at Freeport High School. For academics, our FHS mock trial team competed a couple weekends ago in their 3rd and 4th competitions against other schools in the state of Maine. And so these were their final trials before they just do a final project for the rest of the semester. So we're very proud of their hard work because it took a lot of months to prepare. For our winter sports, they're in full swing. And our girls hockey team's record is 4-2. Our boys hockey team with our new co-op with Brunswick is going well. They're 2-1 right now. They just won to Cape last night. Our girls basketball team is 2-0, and last night the 1976 FHS women's basketball team was recognized at halftime. At halftime of the girls varsity basketball game. So they won the state championship in 1976, and they were only the 2nd girls basketball team at FHS after the passing of Title IX. And then for boys basketball, they are 2-0 right now. And for clubs, our Active Minds Club is planning a ping pong tournament for the Thursday before break to boost FHS spirit and so to win prizes. The Audi Club went on a biking trip for mountain biking at Hidden Valley Nature Center in Jefferson. The Interact Club made cards for children in the Barbara Bush Children's Hospital. And then for events, a couple weekends ago, the Class of 26 hosted a fundraiser, a babysitting night where parents dropped their kids at the high school and student volunteers entertain them. We also hosted the Latin convention for the first time since the pandemic. The goal of this convention is through knowledge and a greater appreciation for Greek and Roman culture, history, and literature, as well as to interest other students in the study of the classics. So we hosted 300 kids from 14 different schools, and the convention was a big success. And then finally, many FHS students have earned spots in the District 3 Honors Festival Band and Choir, as well as the Maine All-State Festival Band and Choir. So big congratulations to them because they spent a lot of hours preparing for the Honors Festival ensembles, which are sponsored by the Maine Music Educators Association. So we're all looking forward to these next couple weeks and then to break, but things are very busy.
Thank you so much, Phoebe. I love hearing all the details, the clubs and everything. So thank you for that very thorough report. All right, we will move on to number 7, which is public comment. I don't know if we have any public comment tonight. Nope. Okay. Then we will move right on to number 8 for reports from superintendent.
All right, thank you. Our first this evening is we're going to have a presentation of a Freeport High School diploma to a veteran. And this evening, we have the pleasure of awarding a Freeport High School diploma to a member of the class of 1968. Mr. Leo Joseph Hathaway left school to serve in the military at 17 years old prior to completing requirements for graduation. In your packet, we have policy IKF, graduation requirements. Graduation requirement law is in alignment with Maine law that authorizes us to award this diploma this evening to Mr. Hathaway. And I'd like to invite Principal Gulko, Board Vice Chair Munson, and Assistant Superintendent Alexander up front so we can award this diploma.
We are incredibly proud to present this Freeport High School diploma to Leo Joseph Hathaway.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's not very often that we get to do something so special as that at a board meeting. I thank Ms. Hathaway's family for joining us as well. Moving on to the agenda, we're moving to letter B. We're going to have Region 10 Technical High School Feasibility Study presentation by Superintendent Chabot and Mr. Stivers.
Which one did you say? Library? Right there. That may prompt you for a tool. There we go. Hi, Colin. Okay. First of all, we'd like to thank you for hosting us tonight. We have been doing this feasibility study for a little over a year and a half, and my name is Sean Chabot. This is our assistant director, John Stivers. Many of you know John. He taught here at Freeport High School. So we will go through this, and then we will answer any of your questions. And the document that you have in front of you, which is some light reading, is the actual feasibility study itself. So as we present or later, you can refer to it. And if you have any questions after you're able to read it over maybe the holiday break, you certainly can email us and we'd be happy to answer any of your questions. So I'll ask John, he's going to start and then I'll finish, and then we're here to answer any of your questions.
Thanks. It's great to be back. So I'm John Stivers. I'm the Assistant Director at Region 10. And I'm going to start with some context. So we've concluded a feasibility study funded by the Alphon Foundation, and this came about. In fact, the interest on Region 10's part in becoming the state's first full-service 4-year technical high school started around 2015 when the Region 10's board at that time was managed by a rotating group of the area superintendents. And they determined that Region 10 should have an independent superintendent director, and so they went about. And since then, Mr. Shabbat is one of the superintendent directors in a line recently. And they determined that for a variety of reasons, that Region 10 should look into transforming into such a school. So that began in 2015. As you can imagine, an effort like this, it took some pushing and shoving to get things going. And I think a major moment for us was in 2022 when we applied for a grant to the Harold Alphon Foundation, received that grant from them in order to study whether or not this was feasible. The study concludes that it is feasible, but not necessarily in every respect. It's feasible in terms of the market, in the sense that there's sufficient interest in various stakeholders. That's true of the employment community. It's true of students. It's true of parents. The shape of the school, there's a lot yet to be determined. And those will be next steps for us. But we're here to report sort of on the state of the study. Alphon made it clear to us that they had no dog in the hunt, so to speak. They were not looking for a yes or no, but rather just a thorough process. And they also urged us to create, in a sense, a roadmap or a template for people across the state that could look at the work we did, how we did it, and they could go about considering for themselves whether this idea would work in different parts of the state. It's no secret probably to anyone in this room, and certainly to anyone in the state, that Maine is the oldest state in the union on average. And as a result, there's tremendous pressure on employers. There's a tremendous shortage in the trades and in just about every area, economic sector in the state. It's in this context that we've considered some of our research. And you may or may not know that the governor's task force on the economic future of the state came up with these 4 sectors that they felt required the most attention and created the most opportunity for the future of the state. The food and marine sector, forest products, technical services, especially including energy production and distribution, and making and manufacturing. So we're not, Region 10, we're a proud provider of education CTE. We're not looking here to recreate CTE or to criticize CTE. We're proud of what we do, and we're proud of being a network of 27 other schools across the state that do what we do. And so I'll explain in shortly sort of the model we're looking at that hopefully will explain that. But national research shows that CTE provides students in general with many benefits, including higher persistent rates in college and higher graduation rates as a whole compared to student populations as a whole. CTE, we already do close work and great work with between our sending schools, and industry partners. CTE is approved by the state. Programs are approved by the state and driven by industry standards, and students that take CTE programs most often have opportunities to get industry certifications and licenses, and those are adult professional licenses and certifications. CTE is an excellent pathway to employment and further education, and Region 10, roughly half of our programs offer concurrent enrollment with mainly with Southern Maine Community College and some others. CTE across the state faces many challenges. And one of those challenges is lost opportunity, lost time for students who, for a variety of reasons, inconsistencies between the sending schools and understandable curriculum features of sending schools that often will conflict with student time at Region 10, even just the transportation time, that kind of thing. And this was a few years ago. We determined that in some cases up to a third of students' time was essentially involved in these scheduling disruptions. That's improved a little bit over the years, by the way, thanks in part to, I think, really, really great partnerships that we have with RSU 5, with Brunswick, and with MSCD 75. We're really working hard on a lot of these to match our activities and schedules. But one of the greatest challenges we face is really a lack of, and that students face, is a lack of, in a sense, opportunity through scheduling and for a variety of reasons to come to Region 10. For instance, if students are on an AP or honors track, it is a challenge to fit Region 10 into their schedules, and understandably so. And so one of the things we're looking at in terms of the technical high school, which you folks probably know are really common throughout the country, right? And this is not necessarily an innovative idea. It's just something that isn't happening in Maine. And some of those schools, for instance, in Massachusetts, are highly competitive in terms of post-secondary education. They have great educational outcomes. And in those schools, students do not have to choose between one track or another. And it's as much a structural issue as it is an issue of will, I think. But and that's part of the reasons we're really excited about the idea of such a high school, is that structurally we can build into the DNA, we can build in these features where students don't have to pick, especially when we're looking at a state economy, which is really driven by technical work, whether those workers have post-secondary degrees or not. And the other thing is, of course, some students also can't fit it in their schedules for other reasons, such as shortage of credits and that kind of thing. Maine employers are struggling in a profound way, and that's true of large Maine companies, medium-sized companies, small companies, mom and pop shops. It is hard to find people. And so one of the things a school like this would do is focus the students, their families, and even to some extent the public's orientation toward the opportunities in the state that exist, where students no longer have to go out of state to thrive, and which, of course, the brain drain that we've experienced for decades, really. We're looking to help at least have one way of us staunching that tide. Many companies now, such as Chinbro, certainly Bath Iron Works and others, are creating their own academies because what they're finding is that workers oftentimes are just not prepared to thrive in the workplace. They don't have the attributes or skills necessary, and so they're taking it upon themselves to address it, and they're somewhat successful, but again, I think a public school model that orients students not only toward the technical skills, but sort of those attitudes would be really helpful for the state and for the graduates. We already mentioned there are many schools across the country that have a great success through this model, and the idea of full service technical high schools take all kinds of forms and shapes of academies, schools within schools, and sometimes specialized schools related to industry clusters. There's one that's always inspired me particularly. It's called the DeBakey School, and that's in Houston, Texas. Of course, Houston is a big city. There's a lot of opportunity there, but Houston is known as a medical teaching school. They have a tremendous sort of medical infrastructure there, and they have an inner city school there where the students who are from downtown Houston will attend this. They have tremendous experiences. They're all on a medical pathway. Some of them are pre-nursing, some of them are pre-technical, like X-ray technicians, those kinds of things, and some of them are pre-med, pre-nursing, etc. They're doing amazing on standardized testing, such as the SAT, and they're tremendously successful. This is one of many models that has inspired our work. We're not necessarily looking to just attract students to CTE, but rather, again, to an orientation toward technical careers. And so their opportunities here are to align a four-year public high school with the needs of the future economy and the aspirations of Maine students, where for students who choose such a pathway, they can see for themselves and experience the relevance and rigor of their educational program based on their career goals. It would support students to build foundational skills. As you probably know, the Maine Learning Results content area of the Life and Career Ready standards, those are difficult to kind of systematically teach and assess in schools. And a school like this one would have those standards at the heart of the curriculum for all 4 years. And we're also looking to expand the number of students in career-focused programs. And what we mean by that is that while well, let me backtrack a little bit. So CTE at Region 10, their school, we have programs by the state. It's on industry standards. There's 350 hours minimum. So there are, and they're somewhat static in the sense that they have to be because they are tied to these standards. Region 10's model moving forward would retain that model. In other words, so students that still wanted an experience at Region 10 have now, where they spend part of their time at the sending school and part of the time at Region 10. We would continue that, but we're adding. So that's here. We're adding, or the model, the thinking is that we would add a 4-year high school that coexists with that. Some of the kids going to the 4-year model would take the CTE courses, but others might take technical training that's tied to more dynamic industries and more faster moving processes, work opportunities, that kind of thing, informed by and taught by those industries themselves while students are in school. Right now, we're looking at a public day school. It was actually, we came out in the news that we were going to have, recently came out in the news that we were going to have housing similar to the Maine School of Science and Mathematics. That is not the case. We're starting out thinking that we're a public day school. Again, full-time comprehensive technical high school. And what we mean by that is that all students that go to this high school would be on a technical track. And but they'd also had the full range of services that they would at any high school. So you'd have, special ed support, you'd have lunch programs, you would have band, sports teams, and that kind of thing. This school would confer credit. Right now, none of the CTEs confer credit. That credit is conferred by the sending districts. There's an opportunity to be located at the Brunswick Landing. This is a very exciting prospect for us in the sense that the Landing is a very dynamic business incubator right now. And it is certainly where there's also post-secondary education located there through the University of Maine system and at the Maine Community College. Right now, we're looking to attract 300 to 350 students from roughly a 30-mile radius. And that being for the full service high school. And we talked about that. Inclusive admissions, we're excited about the opportunities to work with special ed students, ELL students, new Mainers, et cetera, at such a school. So we talk about core academics integrated with technical programs. This is a tall order. I have to tell you that many of these type of schools around the country market themselves as having an integrated curriculum, and they do to a certain extent. It's very difficult to pull off, and we certainly don't claim that we're going to have fully integrated academics. That is a steep hill, but significant integration would be an aspect of this, and also the kinds of standards taught, say through math or science. Many of them can be taught through a study of fluid dynamics, for instance, or things that are more that are framed more in terms of industrial processes. And again, students here would not have to choose between, a rigorous or AP honors related program and technical study. Early college experiences would be, again, built into the experience. We are very excited about the main community college guided pathways work that's being done right now, where they're really paring down and focusing post-secondary educational programming to fit students' career goals. A school like this would be uniquely positioned to teach those 21st century life and career ready skills as a core function of the curriculum. And again, hands-on learning opportunities with partners. We envision a lot of the technical study taking place at the workplace, where we're at public school, we don't have to invest always in this very expensive, high-end sort of cutting-edge technology, where we can do that, where it already exists by experts who already use that technology. In a very simplistic term, this is sort of how the grades are structured. So, of course, in 9th grade, you'd have fundamental coursework, intermediate coursework in the 10th grade. And then, as you can see, in the 11th and 12th grade, you've got advanced academics and integrated academics with technical study. You have dual enrollment and work-based learning at job sites. And Sean will take it from here.
So thank you, John. This slide just simply shows the commuting patterns of the members of the broader community that flow into the greater Brunswick area and those that come out. And within that 30-mile radius that John spoke about, there are over 18,000 high school students. So we're not simply just referring to the three high schools that currently make up Region 10, but for the 4-year school proposal, we're looking at a student population of over 18,000 within that 30-mile radius. Why the Brunswick, in particular Brunswick Landing? As you can see, and John mentioned it, Brunswick Landing itself has over 150 companies, and the University of Maine system and the Southern Maine Community College in particular with the aviation school. So it provides potential students lots of opportunities to reach out and partner with those industries and be able to get real life work experience while they are still in high school. So like we mentioned, this is a feasibility study. It is not an implementation plan, meaning, is it feasible? That's what we studied, and we'll get through that. So one of the first things that we did was survey last year's 8th through 11th graders of our 3 sending high schools. So Freeport High School, Brunswick High School, and Mount Ararat High School. We did not survey that 30-mile radius because we felt like it would be inappropriate to survey students outside of our catchment area because the other CTEs kind of have those schools and it could be perceived as like we're trying to steal their kids. So we were very careful only. So that's why we only surveyed students of 3 sending high schools, and all 3 participated, meaning the high schools participated in the survey, and you can see the results for themselves of nearly 900 students. And those are the students who scored it as 4 or 5, interested or very interested. So pretty high number of students when you take just those students, not considering the other students in the area. And no surprise, all high schools in and around our state try to do as much hands-on learning because we know when students are engaged, their interest and academic achievement raises. So that's not a surprise, hands-on learning. And then you can see the other things that the students rated high for aspects of a proposed school like this. Caregivers, this was an important survey for us to conduct. These are parents who responded to the survey from the 3 sending high schools. It doesn't seem like a lot, 262, but when the number of surveys that go out to parents, we were pretty pleased with that number. And there you can see the results of that. nearly 50% would be extremely interested. So when you add the extremely and very interested, the 4s and 5s again, you're up near close to 70%. Some early thoughts on governance that we studied and we did some research on, keeping the current structure of Region 10 Cooperative Board, which is the members of your board and the 2 other sending high schools that govern our current structure. CTE programs each has their own advisory board under state statute. And we would need to change some legislative or requirements that allows four-year high schools to, like this, career and technical high schools to award diplomas. Current funding, here's our current funding of Region 10. We get the majority of our funding through the state EPS system, through CTEs. Our funding is a little over $2.8 million. And then the remaining difference comes from a local assessment from the 3 sending school districts. And we appreciate your support of that as well. A little plug as we come towards budget season. And then obviously, if this was to come to fruition, we would try to get access to the construction to build a new high school. So that's our goal. But we all know how problematic that can be to get on the new list and the time that it takes. So currently, that's what we're thinking. Some potential funding, some assumptions. So when we looked at a school like this, we looked at similar sized high schools around the state of Maine, and we hired a consultant who used to work for the Department of Education through their finance department, so that to look at how many teachers we would need, how many school counselors, busing, transportation, co-curricular activities, special education, ELL services, all those things. And we found a high school that was in similar size, typical, similar demographics, different geographic area of Maine, but similar. And then when we added the EPS funding for those regular ed students, non-CTE students that would potentially come to a 4-year school, and then other state and federal programs like Title I, Title II, those, we came up to an additional $3.6 million that would fund that. Construction of such a new school based on Sanford's combined high school and tech center. We came up to a dollar cost, and this is approximate, right? And we know what inflation has done to everything. But we took their costs, inflated that by 40%, and came up with approximately a $60 million construction for a new school. So some big questions that still need to be answered around fund part-time CTE programming component as it is today, and then change legislation at the state level to enable this sort of program, the school, to access the EPS model and those tuition dollar, not tuition, but state subsidy dollars that every student every district receives for every student would, instead of flowing to the sending district, would flow to this new school. So our last slide here, I'm trying to move it along just so I know you have a long agenda. Strong interest from students, families, and business communities. And you can see through there, particularly on the bottom, the challenges. It does require changes to state statute. And we know anytime that's you're asking the legislature to change, that can be problematic and politics can other areas of the state says why the mid coast, why not western Maine, or why not northern Maine, so on and so forth. Identify a funding model that holds schools, school districts harmless during a transition period, because we know if students started to leave a school to attend a school like this, those are real dollars. And if you start talking 10, 20, 30 kids at $15,000 a piece, that becomes real money real fast. So we understand that our proposal would hold schools harmless for a transition period, school districts. And ultimately, we know that CTE works in the state of Maine. However, the model that we have traditionally had we are one of the few states in our country that does not have a 4-year career technical option for students. And many of our programs at Region 10 and truly across the state, the other 26 CTEs, there's 27 of us total, there's waiting lists. So there's more students that would take the opportunity if there were slots available. And so our goal is to design a school to meet the challenges of our state, not just of today, but 10, 20, 30 years from now. And what economic future do we want to have, not just for our children, but as a state as a whole. And so that's part of the action that we're taking. And I would just remind everybody that this was just a feasibility study. So it's not an implementation plan. It's not into the weeds of all the stuff that we know we would need to do for the next steps. And just some other highlights really quickly. We have, there is a task force at the state level, and their final meeting is tomorrow, looking into a potential 4-year model for the state of Maine. So John and I presented to them back the beginning of November. And so we're working with them. And then also we have been meeting with other representatives and state leaders about this model. And you may have seen we've been in the news lately. So, but we are, thank you again for this opportunity. We're happy to answer any of your questions. And as you can move back to your seats, that last slide, I don't think we mentioned it. Pat Hart and Hart Consultings, we hired them. We used the money from the Alphon Foundation. So we had an independent person conduct the research, conduct the study. So it wasn't John and I doing it. So it had this, we wanted folks to know that was an independent group that worked on this, as unbiased as you can be.
Thank you very much. That's great. Somebody have any questions? Kelly?
So I'm curious, I would assume that the current facility would be sold or used for other purposes.
So we really haven't gone down that, but I would that's an assumption I would agree with, that if we were able to do such a school and have it in another location, then we would look at, well, the board would decide. Certainly we would make recommendations, but look at potentially selling that site long term.
Hera?
This is really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. Can you say a little bit more about the catchment area and the maximum enrollment?
Currently,
You said something about, so 30-mile radius, and I think there was a number that was given about how many students you would take or you'd be looking for.
sure. So right now, the catchment area, or by state law, every CTE is defined by what schools can attend a particular CTE. So in our case, we have Freeport High School, Brunswick High School, Mount Ararat. A school such as this would not be, the 4-year piece of the school would not be confined just to that catchment area. And I mean just as that area. It would be open to all students within the state of Maine. But realistically, we felt like a 30-mile radius was a realistic commuting pattern, or how far students and or parents would be willing to bring a child. We look at like Cheverus High School, St. Dom's, as two parochial schools, but also other private schools and charter schools, and looked at their commuting pattern of parents that were willing to commute or bring their student. So that's why we use that 30-mile radius. So we look, basically it would reach down to just the northern edge of Portland and almost up to Augusta, to the Lewiston Auburn area. So within that area is almost a third of Maine's population. So you can see, and 18,000 students. So because we were very particularly sensitive of not just drawing from our current catchment area, because we knew instinctively that if all the potential students came from just those 3 sending high schools, it could have a devastating blow financially to those school districts. And so we wanted to make sure that we did research that would allow students from the broader area to attend such a school.
Go ahead.
So would there be an application process or a
Yes.
lottery or?
It would be a nice problem to have a lot of students, but we envision an application similar to what we have now. We have an application process. It would be similar to that. And we estimated 300, but that's our best guess. Certainly, if we went from the feasibility phase to more of the implementation phase, we would start surveying more of that broader 30-mile radius to actually gain more accurate numbers about the potential of how many students would actually. So certainly you don't want to build a new school and then have the problem of that it's full and then you have 200 kids on a waiting list. So we would want to our plan is to have a more accurate knowledge of the number of students that would want to attend and try to build it appropriately. But that's still, and the other piece I didn't mention, if the stars align, and the stars never align, but if they did align, we're really looking at somewhere between 5 to 10 years by the time all the different steps to be realistic.
I have a question about the access to the career and technical education in the sort of 30-mile radius. Like I know, our 3 schools obviously have Region 10, but within that, how many other career and technical schools?
There
are
is PATHS, which is the Portland area.
Portland? Okay.
There's LRTC, Lewiston Regional Technical Center.
Okay.
I mentioned Augusta because we would touch near Augusta. They have a tech center in Augusta, and Bath. Oh, Westbrook, yes. Yeah, kind of that edge of Westbrook.
Okay. So it's not, so career and technical education is not something that every public school student in Maine has access to?
So yes, they do.
Okay.
And if I said it differently, that was a mistake.
No, that's
okay.
not anything I got from your,
All right.
information.
So they do. Every high school is associated with one of those 27. But typically what you will find is there are only so many slots available. And in lots of cases, students are on wait lists or just like in Lewiston, because I spent most of my education career in Lewiston. There's EL, Lewiston, Levitt, which is in Turner, Poland, Oak Hill and Sabattis, Lisbon. And what LRTC does is allocates so many slots per high school. And
Those are a lot of big high schools, so it's very limited.
and-
Okay, I see.
And so I was the principal of Lewiston High School, and he's a colleague, and I couldn't get all the kids in that I wanted to.
Okay, thank you very much. That helps me understand. Colin?
Yeah, I just following up on that. I think what I've been, I guess, wrestling with a little bit is just sort of the, which I think your last response gets at, is that in terms of trying to meet the state's needs, like the industry needs, the kind of current CTE model across the state kind of just isn't set up to sort of really provide the sort of full pathway to meet the demand. And it seems like part of that is due to these sort of limited enrollment numbers. So would you say that's one of the primary arguments for why a 4-year?
I think it's one of the arguments. Another argument, in my mind, is that how we have CTE structured is students come, typically they're juniors and senior year, and they have very clear, like John mentioned, defined paths. But we aren't able to give students a wide exposure to, we envision sort of like once we go down from feasibility to implementation, rolling out what broad fields within like healthcare, like transportation, and have students not just have an opportunity for CNA or EMT like we currently do at Region 10, but the broad healthcare field, and allow them to have other exposures within healthcare like medical terminology, pre-med tracks, and have their AP classes or their general classes, whether it's in science and math, associated and integrated as much as possible within that healthcare field or within that transportation field. So they get exposed And students like say like a student who wants to go to nursing. Right now, many students feel like they potentially don't want to go to Region 10, even though we have a CNA program, ERT, because they need to take higher level classes to be competitive to get into that St. Joseph's College as one example, or UNE. So it's a trade-off, and they don't necessarily have that exposure to the healthcare field of working with real patients. And then they start down that track, and then they find out this isn't for me. And they have spent a year and a half, 2 years of college and then changing the majors. So this would help expose them at a young age before they make those decisions.
Kelly?
And so I'm thinking, as you're thinking about the potential population of this school, it might be highly dependent on what courses or what tracks you're actually going to be offering. So, for example, if you did offer all of these different healthcare field tracks, that it could make this potentially a very popular option for kids these days.
Yeah, so one of the things that John and I have been talking about, and we have been meeting every Thursday as a core group with Pat Hart, who did the study, on John Doerr, who used to be the commissioner for labor economics in the state of Maine, and some other folks, about starting to, when we do the implementation pieces of it, is bring in stakeholders, educators, parents, business leaders, and what really kind of broad fields economically should a potential school like this focus on? Is it healthcare? Is it marine? Is it transportation? So it's just not us picking it, but is it education? Whatever it may be. So we have stakeholder input into that, but absolutely could be we wouldn't build it, I would suspect, or attempt to build it, I should say, unless it's going to be very popular among our students and parents, or caregivers, I should say.
Could you come to the podium just for the mic? That's okay. Thank you.
Sorry. No, yeah, I was just saying that it's a good question. It's one that's come up a lot recently about the particular sort of flavor of the school, the curriculum direction we're going in. And as Sean said, it has yet to be determined. And we recognize that we can't be all things to all economic sectors and all students. We're going to have to make some choices very soon about, and those would be research-based choices based on the economic outcome of the state.
Colin?
John, you spoke about the challenge. It seems like it's a national challenge at established four-year schools like this of integration of the core academics.
Mm-hmm.
Could you just speak a little bit more about what that means and what that looks like? And
yeah, I think it's funny because a lot of not only we did limited research with what we had in limited time, but all the other sort of national and even state level research that's been undertaken about best practices and that kind of thing. Almost all of it points toward integration. That's not a surprise, right? That's been in the conversation for a long time, right? Years. The idea of integrating academics with real life applications. Nothing new about the concept. It's hard to pull off. I mean, I was an American Studies teacher here in a group of 4 teachers, very dedicated teachers, 2 English teachers, 2 history teachers, and it was hard to decide how to do our business for students in American Studies here. It just takes a lot of it's difficult work, and so you have to create the opportunity, the time, the resources in order to make that happen. And I think that's one of the reasons. So I think with great intentions, school leaders talk about and hope for and work toward this integration, but it is very difficult to do. So we would have to take great pains. Whoever we are that would do, because, even if it ends up not being Region 10, we're hoping it happens in the state. Maybe it doesn't end up being on our plates, but we hope it happens. So in whatever shape it happens, special attention needs to be paid to those opportunities for significant integration. But sometimes you just have to teach discrete economics, right? It's just kind of the nature of it. But there's a lot we could do, and by we I mean just public education. It's hard to do, and it takes real will, it takes real focus to pull it off. I hope.
I just had a question about the funding. I know that you were talking about, where the funding would sort of come from to begin with, but annual. I mean, just knowing our funding is from the 3 towns that
Yeah.
we have in a budget that we approve every year. So being a public school, but not really being like related to towns, how would you do your budget?
So we haven't got down to the implementation of that yet. But what we envisioned in our research is still the governing board, to have that Region 10 governing board. But that in essence, to break it down, we would still maintain our CTE funding stream because the majority of that $2.8 million comes from the state through CTE funding. But from the 4-year side of that school would be the state subsidy that follows students now to their public school. So student at Freeport that attends Freeport High School, the district receives approximately about $15,000. And so instead of going to their home school district, those dollars would follow to this new school. And
I thought that might be the case, but I was
Yeah.
just curious if that's.
And that's why we mentioned that if such a school were to ever take place, that there would need be a transition period where we would hold districts harmless.
Thank you very much. Any other? Kara?
Could you share a little bit more about the next steps?
Sure. So our next steps are to continue working with our legislative leaders, which is hard, and other members of the state government. We just met yesterday with 2 of the commissioners, Governor Mills commissioners, and her economic team, and briefed them on this. We have the task force meeting. And so ultimately what we hope to have happen is that one of our state senators or members of the House in Augusta supports such a bill and sponsors a bill, and then ultimately passes that allows this process to take place, to that amends state law or state statute and clearly articulates legally, you'd have to all that, the legalese type information for such a school to be built and supported within the state of Maine.
And so the 5 to 10 year timeline you cited earlier would include that legislative
Yes,
process.
that's why it's such a
Okay.
long timeline, because I think we have to be realistic about, even if we got a bill in this next, and it's a short legislative session, chances are probably not this coming spring. So it'd be in the next biannual, so the next 2-year session. And so then you got to wait in that whole process and then get on the construction list. And then, so that's why we figure somewhere 5 to 10 to be realistic if the stars align.
Any other questions? No? Okay, thank you for the presentation.
And again, if you have any other questions, read it through over the holiday.
It's really exciting to think about. So thank you for all your work on it. All right. So
I'm moving on to letter C. I'm still here.
Yes, you are.
So I have some resignations to announce. Katie Goodall, DCS Nutrition Assistant, Daniel Henton, FHS Custodian, and Stephanie Dearberg, Moore Street School Educational Technician. And our additional, the amendment, the substitute wages. So per policy GCG, substitute teacher and ed techs, it states the superintendent shall inform the board of any schedule of compensation changes for both long-term and short-term substitute teachers and ed techs. And as you know, it's a struggle for everyone to get substitute teachers, substitute ed techs, substitute bus drivers, kitchen folks, nutrition, you name it. So what we did is we took a look at rates of pay for our cohort and also for other area schools. And would like to raise the pay our teacher daily rate from $130 to $145, as well as the ed tech rate to make that the same. And what we have found is that members of our cohort, other schools, generally they pay the same whether you're an ed tech or teacher. And our administrative team actually requested when we had a meeting that we make that pay the same. We're having a hard time finding nurses. Our pay was $140, and what we're would like to change it to is 1/180th of the base pay on the teacher salary, and that way, if we have it worded that way every year, as we know, our teacher the base pay goes up, so would that rate go up? And so for this year, it would be $243.17. For other hourly folks, bus drivers, van driver, custodian, kitchen manager, and food service assistant, they're going to tie it to the top step of the ESP wage scale for each of those folks. And again, that would allow it each year, where it's written that way, it would bump it up. And we looked at that we believe that we're hoping that would attract some more folks. So that's me informing you that we're going to bump those pays. We're going to have it effective December 18th because that's going to coincide with our next payroll cycle. So we've also spoke to some of the directors who work with those hourly folks, and they thought that was a good plan as well. So that's me informing you of that. And if anyone out there would, we offer some very competitive wages for substitutes in all those areas. We'd love to have you join our team. That's the end of the superintendent's report.
All right, we will move on. Oh, sorry, Mara.
Thank you, Jean. And I just wanted to ask, I'm assuming we can absorb those costs within our existing budget?
Yes, and our Director of Finance and Human Resources is right there, and she's been an intimate part of this conversation. That's a great question.
Yes, so speaking of, we'll ask Kelly to come up for her finance report.
So I will answer your question as part of this. In your packet tonight are the expenditures through November 30th, 2023. Right now, we are about 84.4% expended and committed. And by that, I mean largely with our salaries and benefits. That's our largest portion of our budget, as you all know. And so all of those numbers are actually encumbered. And one of the reasons that we are able to absorb this mid-year increase in sub rates is because we are down positions, as the superintendent has reported out at previous, because we are seeing savings in the areas of largely in bus driver, custodian, and there's a few and some ed tech positions. We are seeing a little bit of extra available money, which we're needing to utilize for substitutes.
Sounds like a great plan.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jean and Kelly. I think that's fantastic. Did you have anything else? Or
I don't have anything else unless there's any questions about the report.
any questions? I think we're good. Thank you. All right. So then we have letter B, which is the update from technology department and goal review with Sam right there, making his way to the podium.
Sorry, Kelly's just a little bit shorter than me. Hi, I'm Sam. I'm new here. So in terms of previous goal review or an update, I don't know that. On the one hand, fresh eyes are good because it's somebody is seeing everything that's being done here and has a different take on them and an ability to evaluate. Sorry, I'm getting some feedback. But on the other hand, in terms of like consistency with goals and things like that, you don't have that institutional knowledge or anything like that. That's actually been a tremendous challenge for our department as a whole. We have not had, we have one team member who has been here for 5 years, and then our data specialist has been here in kind of the same range. The rest of the team has turned over in the last 15 months. When did you start, Pam? 13 months. So, so there, that sort of staff retention component, as well as just the institutional knowledge is really somewhere, an area that we're lacking. Let's start with the good though. So the good, we have, I'll just say personally, I think the culture in this district is great. Coming from a couple places where that was not the case, in my 2 previous jobs, it would be hard to overstate how much of a difference that makes, and just like how willing you are to put in the work and the extra time, and you know, when you see that everybody is aligned and rowing their boat in the same direction, it really makes a tremendous difference. We have a great technology team, even though many of us are new in the last few months. Really, strong team. We're providing a strong level of support to students and staff, despite the fact that we're down 1 position at the moment. We've got a very talented data specialist who does great work kind of across the entire district, integrating data with decision-making processes, and providing support to the folks who need that data in the buildings. So that's the good. I mean, I think, and yeah, I mean, the long and the short of it is this. I don't know if any of you like surprises, and the grass, you kind of, in your mind, you build up, you think of a place as being a certain way. Or you think, when I was evaluating coming here, I was sort of like, oh, RSU 5, like good district, good reputation, above average, per student spend. Like this is probably going to be like cake, walking into a job like this. And it, I don't know. Do you like being surprised? I don't know. I don't know that.
Do you have a surprise for us? I guess
I
that's the
think
question.
Sam is
Sorry.
prepping us all for budget.
Yeah, so no. This isn't like I'm not about to drop a hammer. I'm more saying that when the time for my budget presentation comes, I think there's a very real story to be told, which is basically where technology funding was kind of like 2018, 2019, and then where it dropped down to as a result of federal and state funds being made available during the pandemic. Yeah, so there's a clear, there's kind of been a clear trajectory down in terms of the district's contribution to the technology spend for the district benefit. We're in a tricky situation with regards to device replacement, wherein we have typical device replacement in schools is about 4 years. Sometimes you can go longer with devices that are in the hands of younger students because they're not taking them home, so by nature they're less hard on them. But typically it's a 4-year cycle. We're going to be at about 75% of devices will be in their 4th year or older next year across the whole district. So that's because all the stuff that was purchased with COVID money, this is the 3rd year, and next year is the 4th year. And so so and there were also, I think there was a confluence of stuff, that has come together with that. The 7th and 8th grade MLTI program was delayed by a year, which put it on the same replacement cycle as the high school. So then you've got 6 grades of students and teachers that are on the same cycle, which is just not, I'm not going to ask for that. That's not a realistic ask. That costs too much money, but it is a pickle, for lack of a better term. Or maybe that's a technical term. I don't know. The structure of the network in the district is honestly sort of wild for a district or for an organization of this size with this many users. And I'm surprised. Now that I understand how it works, I'm not surprised that it works. I'm surprised that it has worked for as long as it has. It sort of seems it's sort of one of those things that doesn't. It feels like it shouldn't work, but it does, and it has held up. Where I really you have to laugh about it because it's not. It's like we're gonna. I'm here for the long term. I took this job because it's a lot closer to home for me. I'm not going anywhere, but it is a 4 or 5 year project just to kind of get some of this stuff to where it should be. And I'm cognizant of that. I've had this conversation with Jean, with Kelly, with Cynthia. Safety and security are huge concerns of mine, and a lot of the stuff that has a lot of the solutions to the degree that there are solutions to those problems are more technology products, and they are something towards, even if they're involved with physical plant, they're much more technology products. I've managed that in previous districts. We have some serious needs. I'm not going to enumerate them. Phones, PA, and intercom have been, I don't know. They've been dealt with in certain buildings and ignored in other buildings. I think Mass Landing has the original phone system from when that school was built, and I don't know if I think that was like 90, 91. So there's like one guy in the whole state who can work on that phone system, and when he retires, like there's nothing we can do. Like that. This is the sort of thing that we're dealing with. Where I'm sure folks have received complaints from Moore Street parents about the phones ringing at times. That's like one of those things. It's a very similar problem to the issue at Mass Landing, where that's a phone system that is just starting to fail, and we can't. It's written in code that like nobody knows how to write anymore, and people don't. It's one of these things where we're at the end of our lifespan with some of these products. So, and I'm going to leave aside projectors, audio systems, things like that. So I think I should say, I said the good. I do also think in terms of teaching staff and student knowledge, the baseline is much higher here than it is in certain other districts. In terms of how they use technology and their facility with it. I think the STEM classes and the librarian and librarian media specialists are doing a great job with regards to kind of some of the digital citizenship topics, but then also STEM directly, giving kids access to hands-on learning where they're getting to kind of get to do something a little bit more tangible just in the school without necessarily, nothing against CTE, that's wonderful, but they get to do some of that in their own in their school or at a younger age where they may not be exposed to that otherwise. I think all that stuff is great. So that's kind of my big picture overview. The previous year's goals, right? I'll pause for, I should pause for questions, or do you want me to take questions at the end? You tell me.
Whatever you want to do. If you want to keep going, or does anybody have any questions right now? Do you mind if we take a couple then? We have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Carolyn.
I just had one question. So are you able to look at kind of the whole big picture and say, all right, if we were going to fix all of this at one time, would you be able to list out all that stuff and then maybe put that in a priority? Is that something you guys have done yet, or are you still in the kind of discovery phase of what are we up against?
So do I have it like finalized? Here's what I can hand you as a priority list. I don't have that. Do I have a good idea about that? Yes, I do. The safety and security stuff, I would be sort of hesitant to say like this school is more important to do this than another school, just because I don't want to be on camera saying that. Yeah, but everything else, yes, so like, for instance, the phones at Moore Street and Mass Landing are causing us a lot of problems. The PA at Moore Street is also having problems, but the PA at Mass Landing is okay for now. So we can, it's like that sort of thing. So we do have like a rough ranking for stuff like that. Just not in a document that I could hand you and say, here's where we're at.
That's awesome. I was just wondering. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So last year's goals, Gail's goals for the previous year, we're focused on leveraging technology to meet the needs of RSU 5 students and ensuring equitable access to technology for all students. For the most part, these have all been met. There's been a couple delays around network switching, stuff that was I'm not joking. This stuff was ordered in 2019 and just got delivered this year, and just got delivered and installed this year. So that one wasn't, that was no one's fault. That wasn't Gail's fault. That wasn't anybody's fault. It was just one of those things, like they've had just incredible fulfillment delays. And so that's where we've been. All the steps towards cybersecurity compliance last year, those were all done, just not the network switches. And then in terms of meeting the needs of learners, I believe that was all taken care of as well in her first goal. Sorry, just looking over the document at the moment. So this year's goals for me personally, or for our department as a whole, district-wide needs assessment, I think, is kind of something that I was sort of undergoing without really realizing I was undergoing it. But just as I, just kind of being in the buildings, walking around, getting a sense of these things, I don't have, I could rattle off 1,000 things, but figuring out the priorities there, I think that's something that we're going to be working on over the course of this year. We have to make some changes to the way the network works. Just from a security perspective alone, and we're working with an outside vendor to try to who's done contracted work for us before, to try to bring us up to that point. There's sort of a lot of legwork that needs to be done between now and when we can actually implement that stuff, and that's what my team and I are doing at the moment. And then getting a sense for devices and classroom equipment, along with that in the district-wide needs assessment as well. And then in terms of safety and security evaluations, but kind of along all lines, but for the technology our students are using, the network we're providing in the building, as well as building security as well. Figuring out what's working, what's not, more on the physical security side of things, to be perfectly honest. And then meeting with stakeholders about that stuff, planning for FY25. And we do have a great opportunity with a lot of the physical security stuff, which is that there are significant matching grants that are provided through federal grant programs that we would apply for with local PD. And that would basically, the plan is to put some matching funds in our capital budget for that, and then to effectively 5x our money that goes into the capital plan for that. And network and cybersecurity, we are, the big thing here is developing an incident response plan. Fortunately, there is a federal agency with an office in Maine called CISA that will work with us on kind of a first draft on that. So that's what we're starting to undergo this year. And I don't know, with that.
Okay, I have a question about
from
previous year. I know it wasn't your goal or anything, but the under the computer science integration, there was a secure computer science mobile lab grant from
Yes.
Department of Education. It says completed as planned. I was just wondering what is the next steps for that?
Yeah, so those are primarily what they applied for here are Lego robotics kits. And so those are all, their primary location are in the STEM classrooms across all buildings. And that is like a great way just to kind of do introductory robotics and coding stuff with kids. And then once they get to the high school level, it becomes much more akin to like, no, we're actually like programming in the physical world. So that was the bulk of what was applied for with the state grants. And then those are all in place and STEM teachers have been trained on them and they're using them all the time. And in fact, what they were like, oh, we heard I had through the grapevine there, it sounds like the DOE is going to make further, not computer science grant funds, but further like teaching with technology funds available. And the STEM teachers all have been like, we want more Legos. So
that's great. That's
yeah,
awesome. Thank
yeah.
you. Anybody else? Malik?
I was just curious what that transition from the 6 independent networks to the one kind of cross district network looks
Yeah.
like.
So we have, gosh, it's hard to like describe like network hierarchy without like looking like, like on Always Sunny, like Charlie Day drawn with like the red strings between like all over the place. So right now, the way that we receive our like pipe into each building is through MSLN, Main Schools and Libraries Network. And everything is then routed back to the high school via our firewall, but it's sort of its own little independent network in that building that, although it is going through our firewall, so it's being filtered and, we're not exposed to an outside network, or we're not exposed to like, just like widely to the internet without any protection. It does sort of function in its own little silo. And that's created a whole bunch of problems, most notably with regard to, how much do I want to describe? Most notably with regard to something called DHCP, which is like, I don't know, the driver's license, I guess, effectively, that your computer gets to be like, yes, you can use it. You can here's an IP address, you can be on our network. It's created a bunch of problems by not having centralized DHCP across the district, because we have different zones. This is perhaps too in the weeds, but what's that? Okay.
I'm understanding all of it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So in the past, they've allowed for, and I want to be clear, with everything I'm saying, I don't say that any of this to kind of like cast aspersions or anything like that. I think Gail was largely doing this to help the district out and was trying to effectively move things along and trying to keep things on the rails and not necessarily thinking I'm going to do this forever. Let's try to make this, or let's think about this from a holistic perspective. I think some of the decisions prior to her tenure, I disagree with. But anyway, so we've run into a lot of situations where a user in an individual school has huge network performance issues, or in an individual building has network performance issues because it is calling for an IP address that shouldn't be allowed in that building. And that because of it's hanging on to something from another building. And by not really having those independent siloed networks talk to one another, that stuff can't really be resolved. And so what it's creating is like, if somebody has this issue, we're going and having to be like hands-on with their device, as opposed to being able to be like, oh, let's delete this entry and hopefully you refresh your network settings and you're good to go. So it's not just that it's it's not just that it's a performance issue, it's also like a support issue and a time issue for us as well. Sorry if that wasn't totally clear.
That actually gets to my question. First, thank you for this, and thanks for the heads up about budget presentation. Do you? I expect we'll be seeing capital expenses on that in that request, and it sounds like you're also working with vendors and contracting with vendors to help. I'm wondering about the number of staff in your department. Do you feel like you are well staffed to do a lot of this? And you just mentioned that you're having new staff time to do things.
Yeah. So right now we're short one position. A lot of that is, again, this is like getting into like the very deep specifics. That position is like an 86% position. It's 225 days. And so it's like, to a certain degree, I'm kind of like, it's no wonder that we don't have great applicants because it's not a full-time job. So what we were hoping to do, and sorry, can I disclose this? I don't know. What we're hoping to do is to convert that to add some additional salary to that position and convert it to a network and systems administrator, which would in addition to that person kind of absorbing some of the support responsibilities that our missing support person would take on, it would also give us someone who is like first point of contact for any network, phone, PA and intercom system related issues. So that would free up a lot of, I don't know if it would free up a lot of time for me, but it would free up some time for me. And, in terms of how I would spend that time, it would be much more focused on like teaching and learning with technology, which I frankly haven't been able to spend much time on at all since coming on here. In terms of that side of things, the teaching and learning with technology, I think that's not a conversation for this budget cycle. I would gladly revisit it down the line. I think there are different models. There are lots of different models for that sort of thing. Folks have sort of moved away from a technology integrator model. My personal opinion is that sometimes when you have good people, that model works great. If you don't have good people, the model doesn't work that well because they just kind of sit around and collect a paycheck. So I'm sort of, we're light on staff right now. I think when we're fully staffed, I will, if assuming that moves forward and we can hire a network and system admin, that will make a tremendous difference in terms of just our day-to-day as a department.
Ellie. For your technology goal number 2, it looks like you've probably already begun the process of identifying some of the areas that need to be replaced or improved. And I'm just curious if there are any safety, security, access control items that have sort of risen to the top as like, this is something that we need to deal with right now. It's a kind of a glaring gap that we need to address quickly.
So I think without betraying anybody's confidences, I think there's I think everybody on our administrative team sort of recognizes that there's a lot to be done kind of everywhere. I think for the administrators, some of the PA and intercom needs are a little bit higher on like the priority list because Alice is dependent on building, which I totally agree with and understand where they're coming from. I do also, personally speaking, I do really worry about like Moore Street, the access control at Moore Street being backed up like right to Bean, and I don't know if that's like is being the third biggest tourist attraction in Maine. I don't know, but that makes me pretty nervous that the access control there is not is all physical keys. I think the thing is that physical keys worked. They worked for a long time. But the moment you kind of start giving out copies, it just turns into a whole ball of wax. And I think, the transition kind of started like in earnest, like 20 or 25 years ago in schools. And it just hasn't happened in a number of buildings here. And yeah, I mean, I think the other place for access control, we have several buildings that don't have anything. The other place for access control would be the middle school, and that is mostly because the rumors around town is that there's like however many keys you think are floating around the middle school, or however many middle school keys you think are floating around the community, like triple it, and that's probably the actual number. So, yeah.
If I could jump in for members of the public,
Sorry.
our schools are locked and there are procedures in place.
Yes.
I don't want anyone on the board to
Sorry.
walk away or the public to think that our schools aren't safe or locked down because
Yes.
they are.
They are locked. It's the access control side of things is more of the being able to badge in, having good, accurate records of who is coming in and out of your building. That's why things have gone in that direction. It's also for the perspective of somebody loses a key card, and they tell you they lost the key card, you can disable it, but you can't do that with a physical key. Sorry, I might have said too much.
Is there any other questions? Okay, I guess we're good. Thank you very much
Thank you.
for all that. All right. So we will move into the letter C, which is the update from Instructional Support Department, including multilingual services with Dr. June Sellers.
Good evening.
Oh.
Good. Very tall person here. All right, Sam, it sounds like we're going to need a bigger boat in terms of technology. All right. So just starting with the 2022-23 goals. Good evening, everyone. Part of, and I apologize, it's been a long day and my vision tends to get blurry in the evening. But we, starting out with goal number 1, set out to review all of our specialized programs, our previously named functional life skills program, which included programming for students with autism and intellectual disabilities. We completed walkthroughs, observations of those specialized programs using our essential elements checklist to review different elements of programming. And we did complete those walkthroughs, program observations and evaluation. We completed that and needs were assessed. In each of the programs, we identified bright spots and strengths of the program. We looked for some opportunities identified for growth and improvement in those programs, and we determined next steps and degrees of support and developed a professional learning plan for each of those programs. So that would be our choices program, which was our behavioral programming, and our what we now refer to as our LIFT program, our learning independent functioning and transition program for our students with more complex neurodevelopmental disabilities. So in particular for our choices team, that's our behavior program. We updated the choices program manual. We refined our purpose, philosophy, instructional model, and support plan. We met as a K-12 choices program team for a collaboration and work session. And we established a choices community of practice where this group meets repeatedly throughout the year to talk about problems of practice and talk about ways to improve the program. We did an overview of the choices programming and enrollment. We made a plan and actually enacted the plan to do a district-wide launch of the Bridges program that was centered at Durham Community School. So we launched that program at all K-5 schools for the 23-24 school year. And that Bridges program is a part of our RTIB program. It's part of our multi-tiered system of supports for students' social, emotional, and behavioral well-being. And the team met. We met with a group of we framed the initiative for the team. We provided them with resources and kind of those critical success factors and program elements. We created a Bridges program guide to guide each one of those individual teams at all of our K-5 schools. And each team created an action plan, and we did each K-5 school did launch a Bridges program. So what the Bridges program is it provides a location within the school for continuous support and in the moment coaching for social emotional learning. So each program has a skilled ed tech, one from special ed side of the house, from the general ed side of the house. There is a dedicated physical space that's been established in each of those schools, and then a multidisciplinary team structure, which includes special ed case manager collaboration with the special ed tech, general ed teacher collaboration and data collection, a social worker, a school counselor, and like I said, ed tech support that has knowledge of those program elements. And then the leadership structure, there's administrative oversight of this Bridges program. And then there's a non-administrative lead that kind of does that data monitoring, that skilled data monitoring, and teacher coaching and consultation for students that do access that space for planned and unplanned breaks to help them with their emotional regulation. So that I think was a really great, just a really great happening for the 23-24 school year. So, like I said, we updated the Choices Behavior Program manual with updated standards for consistency of implementation across those programs in different schools. We created an RSU 5 guide for responding to student behavior. That draft has been completed and it's being polished and will be a great accompaniment to our new restraint and seclusion policy, which we're going to review tonight. I apologize. I'm getting over some kind of brutal symptoms, and I'm fine, but my voice hasn't recovered yet. So I apologize. So that, like I said, that establishes district-wide expectations for adult interactions with students in response to students' behavior that are trauma sensitive and trauma informed, that are kind of function sensitive and function informed in terms of what the function of that behavior and what that child is trying to communicate, that honors the student's right to body autonomy and their right to communicate their refusal or rejection of undesired objects or actions or events. So this provides a guideline for staff for responding to classroom disruptive behavior, responding to hallway disruptive behavior, a guide for responding to non-engagement in a learning activity in a positive way, and a guide for responding to student who might be demonstrating physical aggression. So another goal in this area was working on our special circumstance instructional assistant resource guide. So what that centers on is students who might be in need of one-to-one adult support. When a team or an individual thinks a student might need one-to-one adult support, this provides an objective way of looking at that student's needs in different domains, and then kind of the intensity of that need. So we now use this for all new requests for one-to-one adult support. And the reason why this is important is because, having one-to-one adult support is a really significant programmatic decision that is considered one of the most restrictive means of support for a student. And students can tend to develop learned helplessness with that, one-to-one support when it may or may not be, may not be appropriate. Students can become very prompt dependent. Evidence of being over supported in some of those ways. So this rubric, there's actually 2 rubrics that teams are able to use, and enables teams to objectively assess a student's healthcare needs, a student's behavioral needs, needs related to support for inclusion and instructional needs. And then along with that, there's an independence continuum with descriptors, and those descriptors range from whether or not in any one of those domains I talked about before, a student is completely independent, if they're independent with extra teacher awareness, if they're mostly independent, partially independent, or not independent. So like I said, it kind of allows us to look objectively at what the student's real needs are and making sure that we're not making a decision that is overly restrictive and might, result in learn helplessness for that student. Any questions? You want to save questions till the end? I don't want to go too fast.
I can wait. Thank you so
Sure.
much. I know this is just the first part. It's just so many great things that you're doing. So thank you, Dr. Sellers. I feel like our community might be particularly interested in the responding to student behavior once that's completed. Would we be able to get an update or something on that later on when
Yes,
maybe just from June?
Yep.
I mean, June.
Absolutely. It's just about ready for prime time. All right. So one of the other goals was to disseminate and establish the Communication Bill of Rights, and I really appreciate the board's support for that. It's on our website, and it really just provides a great kind of a philosophical framework for how we honor student voice. For our students who are most highly gifted, to our students with the most significant and profound disabilities. We worked on the approved models of service delivery and a continuum of special education service delivery. A technical assistance document was completed. So when we talk about service delivery for special ed, we're talking about everything. So by law, we're required to have a continuum of service delivery. So that continuum goes from the least restrictive to the most restrictive. Least restrictive being students who are on consultation, for instance, for academics or behavior. And a special ed IEP case manager would be on a monthly basis or whatever frequency is defined by the IEP team, but they would primarily be consulting with the teacher students to make sure that student is able to access their accommodations, make sure they're continuing to be successful in gen ed. Then we have support facilitation, which is where a special ed teacher goes into a general ed classroom on a flexible basis, generally pre-planned with the teacher to provide that in-class support, and also provide some incidental support to other students in the class who might be experiencing similar gaps that our students with disabilities might experience. Then we have co-teaching, which everybody's familiar with. We have 2 teachers certified in the subject matter, providing teaching in a subject for the entire school period, for the entire school week. Then we have in-class resource, where special ed resource teacher is going in to work on targeted skills with a student in a gen ed setting. We also have out-of-class resource, where students are pulled out. Students may need smaller group instruction. They may need more frequency, meaning exposure to a particular learning concept more times a week. They may need exposure to a particular learning concept for a longer duration of time during the week. And they may need more intensity, which means a smaller group, because maybe they have issues with attention and they need to work on a particular skill, distractions, and with a smaller group. Then we have our specialized programs. We mentioned our LIFT program, our Choices program. And then we do have some students who are outplaced at one of our special purpose private schools. And then we also have students who are in hospital or homebound settings. So that kind of represents our continuum. So what we created was, and I can make sure everybody gets a copy of that as well, but this wonderful just technical assistance document for our schools that contains the definition of each model and then the application of each model, meaning, and this is a great tool for IEP teams and for administrators, because when you're looking at, when you're at that IEP team and you're deciding on the least restrictive environment for that particular student, you want to kind of make those decisions based on data and evidence. And this tool kind of provides them with those elements of data and evidence that they might be looking at in order to determine which of those environments are most productive for a student and for their needs. Let's see, one of the things we said we were going to do was look at all of our LRE data, our least restrictive environment data. And our LRE data indicates that the majority of students with disabilities are in inclusive settings here at RSU 5. So we did do an analysis of that. So for our LIFT program, that's our Learning Independent Functioning and Transition program for our students with more complex neurodevelopmental disabilities and significant severe and profound disabilities. We established that LIFT community of practice. We looked at, like I did those program walkthroughs, we identified those bright spots, strengths, and we looked for opportunities. We established some degrees of support and professional learning for the 22-23 school year, and that's ongoing into the 23-24 school year. Those teams had 4 days of face-to-face coaching, mentoring, and modeling for teachers of our students with significant cognitive disabilities. They also had 12 hours of virtual mentoring and training for staff. They had, and then for 23-24, I'll just mention, I know this was last year's goal, but they've got 3 full days of training and coaching this year and 12 hours, again, of virtual mentoring and training for staff. So we created and we launched the LIFT program purpose, philosophy, instructional model, and support plan. So that includes instructional model and standards-based and person-centered instruction for our students with most significant disabilities. It identified curricular pathways for students in our LIFT program, and then provided kind of that outline and support for teaching and learning in LIFT classrooms. We also said we were going to analyze all of the disability labels for students served in our LIFT program. So that's, students that are in our primarily self-contained programs who are on a modified curriculum. We wanted to make sure that the placement of those students that was considered their least restrictive environment, that curricular pathway was appropriate. Generally, those are students who are on an alternate assessment pathway. And we wanted to make sure that they had appropriate levels of access to the general ed curriculum. Any questions about any of those?
No questions yet. So if
Okay.
you have more, you can keep going.
All right. So 23-24, the new goals for 23-24 is to develop some special ed scheduling guidelines and develop grades 7 through 12 transition continuum. So this would include a transition continuum in which students with disabilities learn employability skills to prepare them for successful transition from high school to the workplace. And it, includes that continuum of programming ranging from high school career readiness to post-high school vocational training at local businesses. And it also includes developing partnerships with our businesses to open post-high school transition opportunities at work locations for our students with significant disabilities. And those are students in our LIFT program as they progress from middle school to high school. So the state of Maine recently expanded the age that students with disabilities can continue to attend school to the age of 22. When I came here in 2020, the age was 20. And I think Maine was one of the only states that had that lowered age. So the federal government came in and Maine did end up changing the age to 22. So many school districts like RSU 5 are in the process of developing transition kind of programs, transition continuums for their students who are aged 18 to 22. So, that transition from high school to the world of adulthood is a milestone, for all young people and for students with more significant disabilities. That milestone really means a shift in how education and support services will be provided. So, a student's transition plan, which should start at the age of 14, includes education, employment, and independent living. And this year, with that new change in the Maine law to the age of 22, this year is the first year that RSU 5 has had a student continue as an adult student with a disability. We've had other fifth-year students before, but this is under the new law, and a student who is accessing that transition programming under that expanded Maine statute. So we're currently contracting with the STRIVE program, which stands for Socialization, Transition, Reflection, Innovation, Vocation, and Education. and that's a nonprofit organization that's based in South Portland, and that provides transition programming to young adults with intellectual disabilities. So we have one student who's attending their Strive TOPS program. TOPS meaning, I gave you the Strive acronym, but TOPS meaning Transition Outcome Programs for Students. So that Strive TOPS program is especially designed for students who are in their 5th year of high school up until the age of 22. Or when they decide to graduate, they can decide that they want to graduate at any time, or they can stay all the way till age 22. And it really supports students in kind of generalized different skills into just all kinds of settings, helps them acquire independent living skills. And we've really seen this student blossom from accessing this program over the summer to where they are now. This student has grown just immensely. It increases their independence in the community, prepares them to transition to adult services, and really gives them experience and social skill experiences with students from other districts who are also in similar programs. So that's part of the goal for next year, is to really kind of develop our continuum here. We'd love to kind of replicate what Strive is doing. It's a regional program. It's all the way in South Portland. There's nothing really here in the mid coast, but the Cumberland County directors are kind of talking about ways that we might expand all of our transition continuums with this new change in the law. So the continuum, we'd be looking to develop program at the high school that involves community-based instruction, and that's students who are they're starting to develop career awareness, career explanation through career interest inventories, actually going out with learning objective on workplace tours and businesses, looking at opportunities to partner with our local businesses to create opportunities for them. And then community-based vocational education, where students would actually leave campus. Once we've established those business partners, students would leave campus for 2 hours or maybe more a day. It would be part of their school day, where they would learn job skills and they'd really start to gain the stamina to really remain focused on those job tasks. And then an ed tech would be going out them as a sort of job coach to help them with that. So that's kind of an exciting goal for this coming year. One of the things we're also doing is completing and publishing a revised instructional strategist job description that is more accurately aligned to their scope of practice, and that's in collaboration with the principals, to really, like I said, kind of make sure that that job description really accurately represents the needs of schools and then what those individuals are doing every day. And then the third goal is really excited to have our new director of finance, Kelly Wedgwood, who's just extremely talented. And one of the things we want to do is create a schema for day-to-day budget flow and processes for planning and forecasting for special ed and all of instructional support, including multilingual services. So really kind of creating that, kind of an effective process for budget cycle management, improved ability to make those, strategic fiscal decisions and really kind of save time and really just create a more disciplined work environment when it comes to how we manage the grant, how we manage local funding, and like I said, how we plan and how we allocate those funds. Any questions?
All right. Anybody have any questions for June?
There was one more goal too. I'm sorry. The DEI committee, that was another goal. Is just kind of leading along with Jean, the DEI committee, to kind of actively cultivate that culture in RSU 5. We are researching, common definitions for diversity, equity, inclusion, and we're looking to add the word belonging. So that's been a rigorous discussion among the committee. We are in the process of reviewing submitted ideas to establish a DEI district theory of action, which kind of, is that formula, looking for the committee's input on that formula to really kind of have us, kind of create that outcome where people really feel included and they really feel like they belong here at RSU 5. And then another goal is to really seek student feedback on the work of the committee. I mean, the student is our end user and the reason here for our core business. So we want to make sure that we get their feedback on the work of the committee and clarity on the work and the outcomes of the committee. Sorry, that was the last one.
All right. Thank you. Anybody questions? No, you are very thorough, June. Okay,
All right.
Colin has a question.
No, I don't have a question.
Oh,
Oops, sorry. I don't have a question. I just have a comment, which is thank you. This was incredibly comprehensive and revealed various acronyms that I need to go research. But I just, I just wanted to thank you for all of your attention to that. And I would say the same to Sam. Just really appreciate the comprehensiveness of how you've approached this, and also just the clarity around the goals for the next year. Which again, same with Sam. So thank you.
Kelly?
I guess I just have one question around the fulfillment of these goals, and that is sort of some of the staffing issues that we've had in some of the special ed areas. And can you just speak a little bit to how we can increase our staffing levels in some of these?
Well, I think we're really fortunate. You know, I meet with the Cumberland County directors, and you know, we all share at each meeting. We share our staffing needs, and we are, you know, thankfully, from a teacher perspective, there are some districts who have just incredible vacancies in actual, you know, classroom special education teachers, and we're very fortunate. We have all of those positions filled. What is the challenge is finding ed techs, and that's we're probably not the highest in need of ed techs, but we certainly do have a number of vacancies, especially at the high school, and our teams have been amazing. I mean, they have been so flexible, and administrators have worked together to provide where, you know, they may have a pretty stable staffing level to be able to send someone over to another school. But we are, you know, we have Ashley Rand, our HR, you know, coordinator, who is out at job fairs and constantly, you know, funneling people to us. And, you know, there are a lot of opportunities out there, and we have, you know, we lose. I'm, you know, very glad to know that we're increasing our sub rates, but sometimes it's just, we get left at the altar where you're just about to onboard somebody and they get an opportunity where they're paid just a little bit more. And, you know, we've gone through the interview, we've gone through the reference checks, and, you know, it just doesn't, that person just doesn't come to fruition. So we do have a few vacancies. Like I said, we're not in as bad a shape as some other districts. We have some very loyal staff who just go above and beyond every single day. But we do, you know, we do have, you know, some of those vacancies, but we are fortunate to have a lot of people who every day go the extra mile and beyond.
Thank you.
Sure.
Laura.
Thank you again so much for all this information, and
Sure.
it's so many exciting things that you're doing. It's really great. I was just wondering, in general, if you could, and I think the resource that you described is so helpful, and I would love to get a copy of that, because I feel like previously, when I first came on the school board, I was trying to figure out that continuum and like what all those pieces were. So that sounds so
Okay.
great that you put that together. I just had a general question about when we identify, and maybe this is our child find policy, when a student would move from RTI into special education, and what that looks like, and how parents are engaged in that process.
So that's a really good question. So, so the RTI process, you know, that really came out of of movement to look at universal supports for students. We really are trying to provide students with their right to a free and appropriate education without necessarily having to have a label. So that RTI process allows us to establish some universal supports. We have the 3 tiers. Universal supports are at tier 1. Those are, when it comes to academics, classroom, curricular, strategies, and teaching methodologies. When it comes to behavior, we have For instance, responsive classroom is something that we use in our schools that provide those universal supports. Then if we have a student who is kind of demonstrating some gaps in their learning, before we necessarily make a referral to special education, there may be a student who just temporarily needs some extra support for a particular concept. So we want to make sure we don't rush to judgment in terms of pathologizing whether or not a student got good first instruction in some concept. So they may need to learn something a different way. And those tier 2 interventions give us time to have a few data cycles in which we can kind of manipulate. Like I said, I mentioned 3 things: frequency, intensity, and duration. Frequency being the number of times the student is exposed to a certain learning concept. The duration meaning the length of time. Maybe they just needed a little longer to kind of grasp. Maybe they needed to be shown a couple of different ways in which to arrive at a particular outcome. And then you have the intensity, which means the size of the group. Maybe a large classroom when they're learning a particular math concept, there were too many distractions. They had a rough morning, they forgot to eat breakfast. We just want to make sure that we're, like I said, not rushing to judgment and sort of pathologizing, a student's need for more exposure to learning. So when a student is in tier 3, there's a phrase that we use that tier 2 is the core, right? We want to make sure they're exposed to core instruction, the core plus more. And then tier 3 would be the core plus more, right? We're increasing that intensity, frequency, duration as we go into those interventions. When we see that across a number of data cycles that a student really is continually needing that core plus more in order to advance and in order to learn and in order to grasp concepts, that's when an RTI team might do a referral for special education. Because what that data and evidence is showing is that student may need that level of support for learning all the time. And those interventions and those types of supports that we implement, those are the kind of supports that would be translated into an IEP, which is a legal document that said that student really needs this level of service all the time, or for this particular frequency, intensity, and duration, whether it's reading or math or behavior. So that's generally how kind of that RTI process might translate into a special ed referral and then an IEP.
That's so helpful. Thank you so much for explaining that. And I just had one more question regarding the Bridges program. That's so exciting that it was expanded. Is that open to all students?
It is open to all students. So it has there's an RTI, the RTIB side, which is general ed, and then it also is open to special ed students. So it's open to both.
Great. So any student or any classroom where a student's having difficulty with emotional regulation, they can get that support. That's wonderful.
Exactly.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions? Okay. I'm just going to ask you, June, if you could give us an update on the multilingual learner aspect of things.
I got that ready. So our multilingual learners. So I think many of you might know that I did, initially have a data report prepared, but that those numbers are fluctuating just day to day. You may know that the Portland resettlement team has decided to relocate our families from the Casco Bay Inn. We were told that funding was in place for the entire year for these families, but they have already started to move. So the funding is in place until August 2024. But I mean, just there is a concern about, temporary housing and temporary shelter for these families. And, while, shelter space and hotel spaces become available in the greater Portland area, they want to take the opportunity to move the families now and not risk possibly having, different family shelters and hotels being full and not being able to move those families out of the Casco Bay Inn. So they have started to move them. Right now, we currently have a total of 92 multilingual learners in our district. We've got Moore Street has 24 students. 14 of those students are resident students. The balance of those would be our new Mainers. Um, Durham Community School has one multilingual learner. They actually have two, but one was exited and is on monitor. But there is one there receiving services. We have one at Pownell Elementary. We have 20 at Mass Landing School currently, 7 of which are resident students. We have 16 at Freeport Middle School, 7 of which are resident students, and 30 at Freeport High School, 14 of which are resident students. So, um, our multilingual learners are identified. I'll just give you an overview. They're identified through our Maine's multilingual learner identification policy. So all students in Maine undergo the same process for determining their multilingual learner status. That first step is the administration of the language use survey. If the student's language use survey reflects that there's a primary home language other than English, an English language proficiency screener is administered to that student. So to screen the students, we use, here comes another acronym column. It's actually the World Class Instructional Design and Assessment, which is known as the WIDA. The screener, so that's for kindergarten, and then we also have a screener for grades 1 through 12 to identify those multilingual learners. So together with the Maine learning results, the WIDA, English Language Development Standards Framework, forms the foundation of our ESOL program in the state of Maine. So all school administrative units are to implement those ELD, the English Language Development Standards, ELD standards, as an essential part of the core instructional program. So those ELD standards provide our teachers with a connection between language development and the academic content and learning. So, to help our multilingual learners communicate information, ideas, and concepts for social, social and instructional purposes. It helps them particularly with success in the content area of language arts, academic success in the content of mathematics, and then academic success in content areas of science and social studies. So we have that ELD standards framework. It looks at key language uses across the disciplines. So students learn to narrate, they learn to inform, they learn to explain and argue. There's language expectations that are different for different grade level clusters. There's proficiency level descriptors that kind of provide us with predictable ways that multilingual learners might develop across the levels of English language proficiency. So they kind of help us see how students are growing in their language development as they move through that framework. And, we continue to develop that English language development program. We also have a LAU plan. I know we made some changes to our multilingual learner policy, updating to the term multilingual learners because we want to honor that we want students to be biliterate and triliterate. We're not trying to make them English language learners. We really want them to be multi-language learners. So we have a LAU plan by the state's own admission. Our LAU plan is one of the better plans. Each district is required to have one, and that is not an acronym, but that is named after the landmark Lau and Nichols Supreme Court decision of 1974 that created, that required schools to have an equal access plan to protect multilingual learners. So we have a LAU plan. That LAU plan satisfies that requirement by stipulating procedures for the identification of multilingual learners that I just talked about, how we're going to assess them, how we establish a group at the district and school level that kind of looks at service delivery and kind of oversees the educational program. We have a group including me and principals that are at the district level, and then the school-based teams. But we look at, we establish guidelines for student placement, for entry and exit into the programs. We look at, determining their fluency levels, their grade level placement. Some of our new Mainers came in with sometimes no schooling, sometimes very little formal education, sometimes really significantly interrupted education over the course of their lives. So it helps us with that grade level placement. It helps us, establish teacher credentials, and teacher skills, and then the service delivery models. Like sometimes we can have a newcomer program for students who really kind of haven't had any formal schooling to kind of teach them how to do school, ESOL content classes, regular classroom program, and it helps us, gives us guidelines for evaluation and record keeping. So that's kind of an overview of our multilingual services.
And I want to jump in with one thing, go back to numbers, because I know the board's been interested in numbers of kids, and that we've lost 20 students in the last about 3 weeks. So it's a significant move for us that we're seeing in our families.
Yeah. And those learners are protected under the McKinney-Vento Act to protect our homeless learners. So they are able to stay at what's considered their school of origin if they want to. And in many of our, I just have to tell you that our families, they were very upset to go back to Portland, and many of them initially wanted to stay here at Freeport schools, and they were very clear about that. They were very emotional about that. They said that their children have learned English faster than they ever did when they were in Portland, and they felt just so accepted and so welcomed here. What they're looking at is the distance, the fact that we're going towards winter. So some of them, have changed their mind because they know, we are using, chartered transportation to transport the students. But they spoke so highly and so fondly of their time here at Freeport schools. But yeah, that's our story with our multilingual services.
Thank you so much, June. That's incredible amount of information, incredible amount of work. So thank you very much for your dedication.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Anybody? No more questions. Okay, good. I didn't think so, but I just want to make sure. All right, so we will move along. So we're on to number 10, which is board comments and committee reports. And letter A would be board information exchange and agenda requests. And Michelle usually does a really good description of what this is, but if anybody has anything they want to share, like report out from committees or anything else that you want to see on an agenda that we can take, we can definitely have some ideas. Anybody has something? No? Okay, looks like we're good. All right, so we'll move on, and finance committee is me. So you have the minutes from our couple of meetings that we've had, and definitely right at the moment where I missed the last meeting, but they reviewed the budget brochure along with the strategic communications. I know they're working on it as well. And then we are also we added an extra meeting, and we have another meeting, another extra meeting to talk about the cost sharing possibilities that we're going to present hopefully in January, we think hopefully. So we'll see. And I would take any questions if anybody has any questions on finance committee. Okay. So we'll move right along to policy, and I'll throw that to Colin.
Thank you, Beth. So the policy committee met via Zoom on December 1st, and we reviewed a number of policies. We looked at EFBA, menu development options offer versus serve lunch concept, which might be my favorite title of a policy. There were that was on our just for regular review of policies. There were no substantive changes, so that's why we're not bringing it forward to you to look at. We also looked at EFE, competitive food sales, sale of foods in competition with the school food service, and we'll be talking about that in a few minutes. We also we gave an initial read through, but we did no real discussion of IMG, which is a policy on animals in school. We'll be looking at that at our next meeting on January 5th of the new year. And then we met for the second, this was the second policy committee meeting where we looked at JKAA and JKAAR, which is the use of physical restraint and seclusion policy and the accompanying procedure, which again, we'll also be talking about that later later today. And just to remind the board and the public that you're always welcome to join us on the Zoom. We get lonely when you don't come. but we understand you're busy at 8:45 in the morning. But Kara cries a great deal when no one shows up.
All right. Any questions for Colin? Policy? Good. Okay. So we'll do the Strategic Communications Committee update and Candy.
Okay. Once again, we were working on the budget brochure and as it went to the Finance Committee, and we will be looking at it again at our next meeting, and it's scheduled, I understand, to go out in March. That's the plan. Okay, we also talked about the strategic planning process, which will happen next year, and begin to discuss the need to have some firms to be interviewed for who might do that. And we talked about that. The one other thing we talked about, one of the next things that will happen is a parent community survey. We really started to talk about we need to find better ways to engage the community and get their input and ideas and that kind of thing. So community outreach will be a big thing that we begin to talk about. And that's basically it.
Great. Thank you so much. Anybody have any questions for Candy? All right. We will move on to number 11, which is policy review. So I guess I'll go ahead and put a motion or have a motion on the table before we begin our discussion. So do I have a motion for consideration and approval of first read of the following policies? EFE, competitive food sales and sales of food in competition with the school food service program. JKAA, use of physical restraint and seclusion. JKAA-R, procedures on physical restraint and seclusion. Kelly, second. Carolyn? All right, thank you. So I'll throw it to Colin.
Okay, so we're going to talk about EFE, competitive food sales - sales of foods in competition with the school food service program. As you hopefully had a chance to read, this is basically a policy that just prevents situations or prevents and manages situations where there would be direct competition between a program that might be run by parents, for example, as a fundraiser, where that would be competing with our normally offered school, and making sure that those are also all questions of nutritional needs are also being met. This was on our regular review cycle, and my understanding that and Cynthia, you can jump in and throw things at me if I'm saying this wrong. But my understanding is that the major change to this, which was not made by the committee, but rather by the administration in consultation with our lawyers, was that Maine Department of Education Rule Chapter 51 no longer exists. So the language about what that chapter mandated were no longer relevant, because it couldn't mandate it anymore because it wasn't around. But it didn't substantively, the removal of that mandate didn't substantively change anything in terms of how we're actually structuring this policy. So it's basically what you're seeing there is a lot of striking through of just references to that rule, Chapter 51, RIP. Questions about that? Yes, Maura.
Maybe. So this big chunk of text that was deleted does not have different nutritional requirements. We're not changing the nutritional requirements.
We're not changing the
anything
nutritional
that's
requirements.
being sold on school grounds. Okay.
No, we are not. It's just that the program needed to go away
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
for reasons that will remain secret between me and Cynthia. Yes, Danielle.
When I was reading it, I was wondering, like, who do you ask permission if you want to have a sale, let's say, at the school? And then, so I didn't know if that would be something we should add to the policy. I think below, I think I found it. I think it's the principal of each school when you look at some of the other policies, but I didn't know if that was something to consider, including just so they're not constantly looking up policies.
So that would be that'd be under fundraising. That where it's referenced, the JJE is the cross reference. That's where that would be.
So I guess your question is, do we need to include it specifically here? I'm agnostic on that. If people feel very strongly about it, we can do so. But I believe that the JJE handles that directly. So. Great. Okay. Well, that was a fun policy. Let's move to the other policies, which are quite clearly not fun. I sent out a note to the board ahead of this meeting just to flag that the use of physical restraint and seclusion, JKAA, and the procedure accompanying are difficult. They're difficult policies to dive into, just simply in terms of the subject matter, in terms of the incidents that they would be addressing. So just wanting to flag that for the board. And I'm going to be relying on Dr. Sellers to walk us through the changes here, which are very substantive and are related to state changes to state laws and state rules. And again, just I would, as I said in my note to the board ahead of the meeting, none of the changes reflected in this the policy or the procedure were made by the committee. These were all made by the administration in consultation with our attorneys and also our partners at the MSMA. So again, we spent 2 meetings looking at this to ensure that we understood it as a committee and understood and asked a lot of questions of June and Cynthia in order to feel good about the understanding. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to June just to walk us through a little bit of some of the sort of top level what this looks like.
Sure. So you all have the new the document with the which is basically the model policy from the Drummond and Woodson. So I mean, I just wanted to share just a little bit for everybody, kind of the rationale for the change in the law, and what it really does. I mean, it's it states it right up front. Restraint and seclusion are only to be used in cases of extreme emergency. When there is risk, let me turn to the right policy, when there is risk of really imminent harm to the student or others. And this comes from the research and the analysis of restraint and seclusion as a practice that really reveal that that there have been instances, not here at RSU 5, but instances where restraint, can lead to death and certainly serious injury. But, the risks aren't limited to death and serious injury. The risks include pain, re-traumatization, as well as kind of generation of shame and embarrassment and fear, which can linger long after the application of either restraint or seclusion has come to an end. So, we've recognized that restraint and seclusion, they're harmful and traumatizing practices. There were some special purpose private schools that did use restraint and seclusion as behavioral modification tools. And there was a point in time where, any school that had used restraint or seclusion actually in a behavior intervention plan, which was sometimes done, needed to remove that as a tool for behavior intervention. So we know that, like I said, restraint and seclusion, they are harmful practices. They have not been really shown to improve behaviors and can really have lasting impacts on the students and all involved. So including students, including staff. We have both students and staff experiencing PSD from the trauma of those restraints and seclusions. And research and evidence just shows that we have better ways to mitigate behavior through positive means, and kind of getting ahead of any instances that we think might cause a student become dysregulated based on what we know about them. We know that restraint and seclusion are have been used disproportionately on students with disabilities. I mentioned it being part of some behavior intervention plans in the past, and sometimes despite those mandates to use them only in emergency situations, staff, these techniques sometimes kind of still find their way in. So we have very low incidence of restraint and seclusion here at RSU 5. We are required to report those quarterly to the state. So the state carefully monitors those numbers. And, I want to say we do have some students who have neurodevelopmental disabilities. Do have some students who might try to elope from an activity and from a classroom and may try to leave a building for task avoidance reasons, for sensory reasons. We have students who have experienced trauma and abuse and neglect. And some of those students are so hyper vigilant. They've got attachment disorders because of that abuse and neglect, and they become hyper vigilant, and they view sometimes even the most well-meaning adult directive as a threat. So we have to be sensitive to the needs of those students, and they do, sometimes that fight or flight mode goes into effect, and we have had to maybe we have Moore Street School, right? LL Bean, in a busy commercial area. We have Mass Landing, can be on a very busy road. There have been times when we have had to, just prevent egress of students onto a busy highway. I would say that constitutes the majority of the incidents that we have had here at RSU 5. They have been in the interest of student safety. So we can certainly go through the changes. I know there were some questions that were submitted, some specific questions about the policy, but you can see, first of all, in the definitions, some of those definitions have been modified. We want to really make sure that people understand what a physical restraint is, what an escort is, what a physical prompt is. We have some changes in A3, in A1 and A3. If you have any specific questions on these changes, and I do have some responses to some questions that were asked. So one of them in particular, in policy JKAA section 1, part A, there was a question about the adaptive devices and the mechanical supports. So again, a harness was mentioned in the original policy. And there was a question of, should we define what adaptive devices and or mechanical supports include, and we can certainly do that. So those adaptive devices and mechanical supports are for students, and they refer to assistive technology for students, and that could be for students with physical impairments, and that could be anything from a wheelchair that is considered an assisted device, a mechanical device, an adaptive device, and a wheelchair sometimes does require students to be strapped in if they need head control, if they need limb control, if they need trunk control. They may need that support in order to kind of maintain their positioning in the wheelchair, maintain positioning in other types of adaptive seating that we have in order to position students for learning who do have those mobility issues. We have standers, and we have different kinds of adaptive seating, like I said, that really allow us to position a student who has those physical impairments for optimum learning. And we really have some really neat equipment and adaptive furniture in order to do that. Some of those do have, like I said, kind of straps that help with that trunk control and limb control. They could also include adaptive sports equipment, adaptive musical equipment for students who have physical disabilities, and could have straps or certain kinds of stands for supporting instruments. It could be the use of a Hoyer lift in order to safely move and reposition and help a student with more significant disabilities with toileting, or for moving from one type of positioning to another for learning or for relief from pressure. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about mechanical supports.
June.
Yeah.
I just I think because this is such a complex policy, and there are I know we do have some folks send in questions about some of the more kind of minutia questions, which I think we should get to. I just wondered if there were any other observations you had or any questions about, I guess, the rationale for the changes from the previous policy to the policy that we're looking at, or if there are any highlights that you'd want to draw our attention to, just in terms of substantive changes that you and how that impacts our students. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think, I think the most substantive change is that this is only to be used in an emergency situation. I think that's the real message, and they're only to be used when those less intrusive means have failed or been deemed inappropriate. I think if we went, what I think the removal of before a physical restraint. What wasn't included was restraints used by law enforcement officers. I wouldn't say this is the case at RSU 5, but there have been school districts who have used a law enforcement officer to kind of work around the reporting. And I think that's a really powerful, a really powerful change to the policy. I think, I think there was a lot of, concern about before you couldn't really even block or deflect a student because that was considered to kind of limit, the way their hand or fist wanted to move. And I think that now, when it comes sometimes to protecting other students too, we can put our bodies in the way, and that's not necessarily considered a restraint like blocking or deflecting was considering before. And I think that's kind of I think that's a more of a common sense measure for staff, and has provided some relief in that area, and I think is perfectly reasonable. The definitions to serious physical injury, I think is helpful for staff, that they could, this is a serious physical injury that's going to result in needing medical treatment. And let me see, trying to find where it is. Like I said, my eyes are a little bit bleary at this time of night. But looking, looking at C, let me see, section.
In
Really,
JKAA, under definitions C.
Yeah, I think really defining what serious physical injury is, that was a big question.
Yeah.
That was kind of hanging out there when the law was passed, but the regulations and the guidance hadn't come through.
I might just jump in here to say one of the pieces of the conversation we had as a committee was and was very helpful. June and Cynthia walking us through how also this policy continues to make clear that it's the use of physical restraint or seclusion only being used when there's imminent risk of physical injury to a human being, so not to school property. Which was I think it was an important conversation because that also brought up some other questions in terms of like what might activate that.
Right. Yeah, I think that's an important designation, that it does not include property misuse, because a lot of times, that does happen when students are frustrated and when they're dysregulated. We want to make sure that we use safety care is the nonviolent crisis prevention intervention method that we use, and staff are trained in those methods. And we want to make sure that whenever possible, we give students space, because that's a lot of times what they need. They need space. They need to be able to decompress. We train our staff in that verbal de-escalation to kind of recognize when a student is kind of entering that escalation continuum, and strategies that we might use to kind of mitigate that escalation. Like I said, we try to get, on the front end of that. And can you repeat the question, Colin? I'm not sure I answered your question.
I didn't. Did I ask a question? I don't think I asked a question. I was just clarifying a thing.
You were clarifying.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Got it.
I know it's very late. We should all go home.
I know, right?
After we talked about this and then anything else.
We were talking about property misuse.
Yes,
That's
property
what we were
misuse.
talking about. Yeah, we want to make sure that, if a student, property misuse. If a student, for instance, is toppling over a bookshelf and that bookshelf full of books may fall on them, that would be risk of imminent physical harm. It was a very small child and that was going to happen, but that would be an example of, when you would want to intervene, and make sure that student was put out of harm's way so that they weren't injured. We've had, students sometimes can get up on cabinets and there's a window right there and sometimes they can bang on the window. We want staff to be able to recognize when it could be risk of imminent harm. And like I said, our numbers are our restraint seclusion numbers are extremely low. And there was actually a question about the aggregate uses, the aggregate number of students and the aggregate uses. And I think, to that question, I would say that when we look at our restraint and seclusion numbers, we're talking about a really small number of students. And some of those instances are the same students who do have that trauma history. So that's why the reason why those two numbers are different. Trying to find where that question was.
And I think there was also a question about whether there's a difference between total and aggregate. And I think those words more or less mean the same thing. So maybe we just should take a look and make sure that that's consistent. Otherwise, Danielle will call me at midnight.
That's right. Yeah, Danielle did ask some great questions.
Yeah, just if anybody's keeping score at home or on the board, Danielle's definitely winning in terms of sort of real kind of keeping an eye on the minutia. So if anybody wants to compete, Danielle is your front runner to beat.
Yep.
But I have a question about the aggregate. So so the total number would be if there were 5 incidences, but then we're saying the aggregate number of students might just be 2 students because maybe one student did it 3 times and one student did it twice.
Yes, exactly.
Got it.
Yep.
Carolyn, you may have a question.
And I just want to confirm something because I've read through this, but I've been very sick and I have 3 brain cells bouncing around in my head right now. This policy does also cover the police officers. They whatever, even if resource officers step in, those incidences are also reported.
They are
Okay.
reported, and that was one of the questions that was asked. And this was because of a change in the law. There was some uncertainty on the issue when the new restraint and seclusion law was adopted. Given that it kind of broadly applied to the public schools and other educational entities, the old Chapter 33 rules did have an explicit exception for school resource officers, but this is not carried over to the new law. Like I said, because sometimes there were districts who kind of did, a workaround when it came to calling police officer or a school resource officer. Let's see, there was a question. There were several formatting questions, and
yeah, let's maybe delay the formatting questions. Maybe let's just open it to sort of any sort of questions about what either about the policy or what June has shared, just generally.
I know there was one question about incident reports, that the incident reports need to be completed and provided to an administrative designee. There was a question about the location, where are they? And an administrator does have to be involved. I think that's part of onboarding at different schools, that they know where the incident report is. That was a recommendation. Do we need to put that in there? I think that's kind of a procedural question that we might need to decide. The incident report does have to be completed and provided to an administrator. It has to be, in all cases, provided to the parent also. So I don't know if we need to put the whereabouts exactly.
Yeah, I don't. My sense is probably we don't need to put the location of that. I believe that's more of a. I think that probably falls under the where it's sort of a general principle for policy and procedure making. We prescribe what we need to prescribe, and then we leave up to the administrators and educators' discretion and professional expertise. Otherwise, I think that would fall under that. I think the only thing I would just sort of flag is that this is one of these pairs, like it's a paired policy and procedure, right? So they are meant to go together. The procedure flows from the policy. So the policy is, I guess, the sort of the top document. So we'll see some echoes between them. There might be situations where we would wonder why are things not repeated, right? But in general, I think again we're trying to sort of limit that. But they are meant to go together, and the procedure is meant to again really get more granular in terms of what the staff is meant to do.
Right. There was a couple of questions in the procedural. One was where the incident reports were, where they should be located once they were completed. The other one was when in JKAR section 5, part A, number 2 referred to meeting with the student with the administrator or designee. And there was a question, should this include a parent or legal guardian? I mean, an administrator or designee is supposed to notify the parent about the physical restraint or seclusion and any related first aid provided as soon as practical, but within the school day the incident occurred. I don't know if there's a recommendation that we add the parent or
You're
guardian
talking
there.
about the question from Danielle that
Yep.
was number 6.
Right. That's
right?
JK.
So there's the question was regarding whether in what is it, section
Whether that should
4
be
part
added.
A number 2 whether at that particular point of reporting a parent should be notified. My understanding of that is that is covered under 3 under notification, which necessarily comes before. So everything in 3 would have to happen, including parental notification, and then that
was my read as well.
triggers 4, so that at that point it's not it's sort of already happened. It was my understanding of that. But again, I don't know if you read that differently, but I don't
that
think
was what I noted was that should already be a part of it. But if there's a recommendation that we be more explicit about that, we
Dr.
can certainly
Sellers,
entertain that.
I think my question was more if we're planning a meeting with the student, are the parents or legal guardian going to be invited as well, right? This isn't going to be a one-on-one student and administrator.
Can I jump in on that one?
Sure.
Just having experience with this with my principal hat on. Generally, when we're talking, that's a debrief meeting, and sometimes you're talking with a little person. It's really the team. The team is talking to the child, and it's like, what things could we do differently next time? How did you feel before this happened? So it's really a debrief. It's a teaching moment. I would say it's more of a teaching moment than it is. It's not, I've got you did something wrong, but it's really a teaching moment for that child so that we can figure out what are we going to do going forward to support that kid.
Yeah, I think that would be where I would just rely on Jean and June's understanding of what that moment requires, and it would seem both in the spirit of what this lays out, but also in terms of that previous step that again the parents would be aware of the incident, and so I would assume that they would be aware of also be clear of their desire to participate in anything going forward.
There was. Oh, go ahead. Somebody was saying-
No, no, we did get some great questions in advance, but also just curious if anything has arisen to the surface that would be helpful to chat about before we continue to go through some of those. Cool. Let's go through the prepared material then. June, do you want to just go through
Sure.
some of the
there
things you
was
picked up?
also a question about the 10 minutes used for the time. So used for the time and restraints or in seclusion and how that was determined. So that is the state guideline. I went back to Drummond and Woodson to ask if they knew where that came from. And their reply was that it was simply what was in the law and they did not know. If at some point it was sourced from research, um, in researching it myself and having done this in the past, I mean, just looking at, the duration of these applications in general, I mean, I think it's reasonable to conclude that the longer a restraint goes on, um, the more dangerous it can become for the individual. So, like I said, I researched this issue, but at this time, I haven't found any specific support for that time frame. I'll continue to seek an answer. Um, but what we want to make sure we do for our school teams in interpreting this, which we will roll this out, is caution about any interpretation that a restraint and seclusion within that time frame is risk-free or low risk. So that's just kind of a general caution. If we're not sure of where that came from.
Okay. Yeah,
That
thanks
is our
for
current
continuing to kind
guideline,
of look
sure.
into that. The other question I wanted to just jump to, which I think is more of a not formatting exactly, but it's content, but not necessarily in terms of what you're speaking about, is the number 3, Danielle, when you asked about. So in the the revision, there were a number of the definitions were cut from the procedure, but they remain in the policy, and yet. Danielle, you noted that the definition of emergency, which was previously in procedure, does not appear in the policy. So I think that's a great catch, and I would recommend that we add that language as it appears in the procedure, defining emergency, putting that into the policy, unless there's some substantive reason why that should not
No, I
occur.
don't think so. I would agree with that.
Does that address that concern, Danny? Oh, could you, June, could you just describe for us what this also flows from a question? What an aversive, is that the correct word? In section 1, part B, number 6, and I'll turn our hymnals.
So yeah, I'll turn in my hymnal, but I just will say in aversive generally. Let me just see where you are. You said it was
Section 1, part B, number 6 in JKAA-R.
Number 6. Yeah. So an aversive, and it mentions chemical restraints, which are not allowed, but an aversive procedure is something that the student doesn't like. So it's any kind of application of, something that they don't like in order to try to control or manipulate their behavior.
Yes, that's
not
cool.
Not allowable.
We're going to add that as a definition. It's not cool. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, it was just I think that was one of those moments where it was my vocab was failing me. And
sure, absolutely.
Thanks for flagging that, Danielle.
Yep.
Other things that you caught, June, from.
Let's see. One of the things that wasn't really formatting was under incident reporting. There were 2 lines regarding identifying students having individualized education and 504 plans. I think Danielle did catch duplication in that list. It does list it twice, like it, let's see, I think it said pages, you got it? Yeah. It's number 3. It's actually number 3 and number 19 are a duplication. Yeah, so one of them, I would keep the more wordy one, just me.
I see. Yeah.
Wait, let me see. No, I think it's the other. I think it's regarding 504 plan. Number 3, there's a list
right here
on one of the pages.
Page 7 of 12. Yeah. So what did you say?
Yeah, I know. I think it's, hold on a minute.
3 and 18.
I think that particular
19.
one.
Sorry, 19.
Number 3 and number 19. Here we go.
We just really wanted to make sure people know,
Incident
so you just included twice.
Number 3, does the student have an individual education or 504 plan? And then number 19, whether the student has an IEP, 504 plan, behavior plan, or IHP. I would keep number 19.
Keep 19.
Yeah,
keep
3 and
19.
19
cut
are
3.
really duplicates, but I would keep 19.
Okay.
Yeah.
How does that make sense to folks?
Yeah,
Cool.
thank you,
Cynthia, you've
thank
got
you.
that.
We're
Yeah,
catching that.
you do. Yes.
So I think this was yours.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. Um.
Let me see. Then there was the clarification on the reporting of the total number of incidents compared to the aggregate number of uses and the aggregate number of students. So there is a difference between those two numbers. As I was saying before, they were asking if those numbers were all the same, and the total number of students and total number of uses could be different for the reasons I said.
Yeah.
You could have really it's this kind of the small same number of students having those multiple uses.
Okay. I had a question to return to the question regarding emergency first responders, which I think does contain law enforcement. I admit to being a little confused about how that is, how our policy syncs with the most updated state language, because my understanding is that in the state language, that carve out for the rules governing physical restraint and seclusion do not apply to emergency first responders. There's two in the version I'm looking at, which no one would have in front of them, is the state law as of September 27th, 2023, still has that language in it. It's section under physical restraint, section 6, it would be number 5, which says exclusions for emergency first responders. It says emergency first responders, including law enforcement officers or school resource officers employed by a police department in the course of their professional duties, are not subject to this rule. So I guess I'm just curious how, because my understanding of what we looked at, that it did not have that carve out, but the law
Section
seems
6 number. Tell me where you are.
No,
again,
I'm
Colin.
sorry, June. I just did a little bit of research based on one of Danielle's
Oh, okay.
questions. And so the state law as of September, whatever it was that I said, still has a carve out for emergency first responders.
Got it.
So I just don't understand how this syncs with that. And that's, I guess, a question for you, but also probably for our lawyers.
Yeah, I think it's a question for the lawyers, and I think, and this could be just me, but when I think of like we have the strike through on law enforcement, right? It doesn't include law enforcement anymore. That is considered a restraint. But when I think of the term first responder, I'm thinking to some sort of traumatic event, like more of a global event that would involve, it could be a mass shooting. It could be some other emergency. I think that's where my thought goes with that, rather than to an individual person responding to an individual who's
Right.
having
Okay.
some sort of an experience, behavioral outburst of some sort, or behavioral acting out. I'm thinking of it in those broader terms, and where we might have to physically restrain someone who's been seriously injured or compromised in some way because of one of those events. That's how I think of it. But I think going back to Truman and Woodson, I think gets great to get some clarity from them on that.
Do you have a thing? Yeah, Mara's maybe got a thing.
I didn't find anything. I'm happy to look, but was this law just passed in the last session? Do we know? Because sometimes the
parts of it were.
Okay, and do we know if the rulemaking, there sometimes can be changes to the rules, and I don't know if the rules were updated since the law passed, is what I'm thinking. So, because you're talking about the department rules, which would be how the law is implemented and carried out. So I'm wondering if the discrepancy is just that the rules haven't caught up to the law yet, and the department just hasn't.
They have. I think there was a long
there was.
wait though for that.
Okay, so they did
We've kind of
update the
all been
rules?
waiting
They
for
did
it.
update the rules already?
Yeah, this happened over 2 years ago.
Oh, okay, so it's
and
been a
so
while.
now the rules just came out. That's what we've been
Oh,
holding
okay.
on to,
Right.
waiting to do this.
Right.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think maybe let's just good question. I think maybe let's just since this is the first read, between now and the second read, we will speak with Drummond Woodson just to clarify, because I think, just to your point, I think that your understanding and our understanding, I think I could say this of the committee, Candy and Kara, was that that carve out for law enforcement being used as kind of a workaround was no longer was no longer permissible. But I'm just curious whether this rule at the state level technically still allows that.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's
let's
interesting that
just-
they use the
let's try
term
to figure it
first
out.
responder, but I think we definitely go back to Drummond.
Right. And again, maybe like
and ask
the
for
spirit
clarity.
of what that was intended, but it just, since it's in the law, it doesn't say in the case of an emergency. It
Right.
just says emergency first responders, including law enforcement, it does not apply.
Is there a possibility in that, in my experience with this kind of stuff, actually specifically Darwin Woodson is pretty hard to get them to pass a yes or no opinion on somebody else's decisions. Is there a possibility that we could add some kind of clause that would say, in the event of, say, a first responder, a police, a school resource officer does have some restraint or something, and because of the state law, technically they don't have to report the thing, the incident. Is there a possibility that the people who are also there, because I presume a first responder wouldn't be there without an administrator present, is it possible that they could also just document the occurrence so that we have it on file? Because I think that's really important.
Right. I mean, it seems that you're drawing an important distinction or relationship between the use of restraint and the documentation of that restraint as part of by our district. And I think, that makes sense. I don't know how we would handle that, but I think that makes sense. And I actually wonder whether because I didn't actually look at the updated reporting rules. I just looked at the updated rules for for use of seclusion. So it's possible that's covered. It may be that at the state level, it says even when an emergency first responder uses force and it doesn't have to abide by these rules, it still was reported. So I don't know. So I think we'll look into that.
Awesome.
But that's a really important question.
We'll definitely look at that.
Again, Danielle is winning. She's just kicking all our butts on asking really great questions. There was one other point that Danielle, you raised around what I highlighted it and everything. Oh, least amount of force necessary. So there's language in the state rules that says explicitly, to quote the one from the seclusion, quote, this is the least amount of force necessary is used to protect the student or another person from imminent danger or serious physical injury. And I think, Danielle, your suggestion was that that's good language, and perhaps we should consider including it. I don't know if you want to say anything.
No, I mean, I think it was mentioned a couple times in the one that I printed from online, from the
Right.
state website. I don't know. I think it's just kind of gives everybody that we're going to do the minimal first, right?
Right.
Before we get into the big stuff. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I like the language.
I
of how
definitely
it's written
agree
out.
with adding that.
Yeah, I think I agree. And if the committee seems open to that, we could look at seeing where we would add that language around just emphasizing the least amount of physical force necessary is used. So yes, again, good catch, Danielle. Other questions or thoughts for us as we go back and then do a second read? I'm not doing anything until 10, so I figure we can just hang out and talk about this for another 35 minutes. And Jim-
No, if we're done, Colin. Are we all set with this policy? Is there anything else you would like to
We
add?
just need to thank June for hanging out with us so long and being so helpful, both in just in walking us through this policy as a committee and for walking us through it as a board. So thank you. And
Okay.
Cynthia, thank you as well.
My
All
pleasure.
right, so we need to have a vote now that we've done all our discussing to for approval of the first read. So we have a motion on the floor with Kelly and Carolyn doing the first and second. So can I see all those in favor? All right, none opposed. Thank you. Okay, so we'll whip through the unfinished business, new business, and go to 14A, which is personnel, which you should have a, thank you. We should have a paper in your folder, salmon colored paper, which is always something you want to put back in your folder. It's confidential, somewhat information. Okay, so we are going, could I have, do you have something? Yeah, okay. Can I have a consideration and approval to employ a second grade teacher at Moore Street School for the 2023-2024 school year, 1 year only? Danielle, Cheyenne? Great, thank you.
Okay, I have going to present this evening Ann Truman. Ann Truman has an associate's degree in special education from Kennebec Valley Community College in Fairfield. She is certified, has certification K-6 elementary education. Relevant experience, and has been a Title I reading and math ed tech for the Augusta School Department, the lead teacher for extended school year program at Windsor Elementary School, a grade 4 long-term substitute in Windsor Elementary School, and a Title I in math educational ed tech 3 at Windsor Elementary School. References describe Ann as reflective, flexible, having a positive impact on the school. She makes learning fun for students, and she fosters family relationships.
All right, does anybody have any questions? Mara?
Am I reading this correctly, June, that she's still in school?
She is taking classes.
She's taking classes.
She's taking
Okay.
classes right
Okay.
now. Yeah, but she is certified.
All right, anybody else? No? Okay. All right, all those in favor? Any opposed? Nope. Okay, great. Welcome, Ann. All right. Where did my agenda go? Okay, sorry. We are down to public comment, which I don't think we have anybody left for public comment. So I would take a motion to adjourn. Maura, Kelly, thank you. All those in favor? Yeah, okay, none opposed? You're not opposed, Danielle, are you? Okay, all right, thank you. All right, all right, thank you very much. Have a good night.